Good morning. I'm Virginia Senator Mark Warner, but also a fellow Alexandria resident. I think we all think back 19 years ago today, where we were that Tuesday morning when America was attacked by coordinated terrorist actions at the Pentagon, in New York City, and unfortunately in the plane crash that ultimately ended up in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We remember all of those who gave their life that day, not only the direct victims, but so many of the first responders, the firefighters, the police officers, and others who rushed to the scenes of tragedy in Pennsylvania, New York, and right here in Northern Virginia. My thoughts are with so many of the family and friends who still are recovering and may never fully recover from the tragedy that happened that day in America. In so many ways, our nation forever changed that day. And I firmly stand behind all those who keep our nation safe, members of the armed services, and a particular shout out to the community, those who serve in the intelligence community, where I have the honor of being vice chair of their oversight committee, oftentimes toiling without the recognition that others receive. I pray that they will all be safe for our nation in the coming weeks, months, and years ahead. I also think that as our nation now is confronting a different kind of crisis, a pandemic, and too often we see political leaders use this pandemic as a way to split us apart, we need that same sense of all in it togetherness that pervaded all Americans in the aftermath of 9/11. So for all those who gave so much on 9/11, I salute you to that spirit of unity that existed at that moment. We need it back. And again, a recognition that we still live in the greatest country in the world, and it is all our duty to protect that freedom and liberty for years to come. Thank you, and again, thank you for allowing me to participate.
Hello, I'm Justin Wilson, Mayor of the City of Alexandria, Virginia. Nearly 2 decades ago, terror came to Alexandria's doorstep when the Pentagon was attacked on September 11th, 2001. For nearly 3,000 Americans, these horrific attacks ended their lives and left countless family members experiencing a horrific personal tragedy in the midst of an international tragedy without compare. Our nation felt a sense of vulnerability and suffering that impacted our country for decades to come. 19 years later, we remember the surrealness of it all. As we grapple with a very different and ongoing tragedy, I cannot help but observe the enormity both crises have in common. And as we are experiencing today, in the aftermath of September 11th, we saw the one thing that those who perpetrated that heinous attack could not attack: the American spirit and our boundless resiliency. Americans of every type came together to assist each other, find ways to serve, donate blood, raise money, join our armed forces, enter public service, and become a part of something that was larger than themselves. We saw Alexandria's public safety team immediately join the mutual aid response at the Pentagon and then transition their operations to support new Homeland Security roles in the weeks, months, and years after the attacks. For me personally, I have always looked back at that period with such conflict in my memories. My wife and I got married a few days after 9/11, on September 15th to be exact. We spent the days and weeks before the 11th doing the things that those planning a wedding do: organizing flowers, cakes, invites, etc. My wife was supposed to be at work at the Pentagon on the 11th, but she pushed back her assignment to allow for our honeymoon. We knew folks who perished at the Pentagon. We knew folks who joined the rescuers that day and the days after. On that Tuesday, the things that mattered in a wedding no longer became of a concern. We celebrated that Saturday the beginning of our married life together, but also cherish the opportunity to gather with family and friends, give thanks for our safety, remember those that were not so lucky, and make a small triumph over the terror intended by the attacks. Now, nearly 20 years later, we must approach the moment that our nation is in today with the very same unity, the very same clarity of purpose, and focus on resiliency. As the memory fades somewhat, we must remember the tremendous sacrifice of those in public service after 9/11 and ensure that we never lose the capacity as a nation, as a commonwealth, and as a city to come together and tackle even the largest challenge. May we never forget those whose lives were lost and honor their memory with our good deeds. Thank you.
After the tragic events of September 11th, 2001, it seemed our world had utterly changed. I remember driving down Washington Street to work in the morning when I first heard on the radio of a plane hitting the World Trade Center. By the time I got into work, a second plane had hit the second tower of the World Trade Center, and then after that, the flight into the Pentagon, and then Flight 93 crashing in Pennsylvania. It was a brilliant day. It was a perfect fall day. But later that morning, what was sunny was clouded. There was smoke. There was our horizons were darkened by the events of that day. Our nation lost its innocence, and some probably the naivete that surrounded our daily lives has ended. We were bowed in grief, fear, and uncertainty about the future. In the aftermath of that dark day, Fred Rogers, we all remember him as the host of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, told a story about when he was a boy and saw scary things in the news. He said his mother would say to him, "Look for these helpers. You will always find people who are helping." To this day, especially in times of disaster, Mr. Rogers said, "I remember my mother's words, and I am always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in this world." Today, we pause to remember the helpers. Remember those first responders and civilians who rushed into danger without looking back. Remember the passengers of Flight 93 who knew their actions in stopping that plane from coming to Washington were going to result in their deaths. They went forward and are our heroes. Remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice. We remember the volunteers, the residents, the organizations, the city agencies, our first responders to the incident at the Pentagon, and all the backup employees and those in the community who put forward their time, their talents, their resources to help deal with the situation, help our stunned community and region recover. In the spirit of these heroes, our first responders continue to be there for us, even as we face new, daunting pandemic challenges as a community and as a nation. Often unsung, they are there for us, not only through these dangerous times, but also working to protect us 24/7, 365. Our historic caring community has also produced its own helpers. Neighbors, colleagues, and others have reached out to others in need. In the spirit of these brave souls who sacrificed 19 years ago, and their deeds inspire us to be the best we can be. The people in our community have helped. For example, during COVID, we've delivered to those who cannot afford everything they need to put on their tables to eat. We've 1.4 million meals so far, and we're continuing that effort. So we encourage all of us to pull within ourselves, to open up our hearts and find that helping spirit within us all. Thank you, and may God bless.
Hello, I'm Chief Michael Brown of the Alexandria Police Department. September 11th. It brings to mind a lot of things for us as a nation, for us as individuals, and especially for those who are first responders and those who take 911 calls. Many of us remember that day vividly. Others may not remember it, but they have certainly studied it. That was the day that was perhaps the biggest challenge for first responders across this country, especially in New York City. It was also a big day and a challenging day for people who may have been on a flight that was disrupted, interrupted, and ultimately crashed either into a building or a field. People lost their lives. And while many were running for their lives that day, we all saw visual images of firefighters and police officers going into harm's way. Sadly, many of them didn't survive. We should never forget September 11th. My fear at that time was that we might. I appreciate you taking a little time out of your day today to remember what took place on that very tragic day, September 11th.
Hello, I'm Sheriff Dana Lawhorne. This year we are remembering the September 11th anniversary with a different type of ceremony. But I hope you feel like I do, that it is more important now, more than ever, that we come together to remember and honor those we lost 19 years ago. This year has been challenging and everyone has had to make sacrifices. But when we think back to the days and weeks after the September 11th attacks, we all felt as though we could overcome anything. We were focused, determined, and strong in spirit. Today, as we reflect on the courage and strength of those who were killed 19 years ago, may we continue to honor their memory and their sacrifice by living our lives with their courage and their strength. Whether ordinary civilians who were faced with the cruelest of circumstances or dedicated first responders who knew that any call for service could be their last, they were the very people we still are. Neighbors, law enforcement officers, business people, families, members of the military, firefighters, friends, brothers, and sisters. We were the fortunate ones that day, but we cannot take it for granted. We need to truly honor the memory of those we lost by being resilient, by remaining strong, and by facing fear, and by serving others, and by living the full lives that they were denied, and do so with humility, dignity, compassion, and respect for others. We owe that to them, and we will never forget. Thank you.
On this day, 19 years ago, America witnessed an horrific attack on America. We lost nearly 3,000 people that day. Some of them were first responders, to include firefighters, paramedics, and law enforcement. We will never forget. We will never forget the heroic efforts of so many. In fact, we have some of those members today with us of the Alexandria Fire Department who will give you an account of that day from their perspective.
When I pulled into the Pentagon and I saw the giant hole that the aircraft had made, I lost friends at the Pentagon that day. I've lost members of a fraternity, for lack of a better term, in the military that I served with.
Good morning, I'm Patrick Evans, captain of the Alexandria Fire Department. I remember 9/11 like it was yesterday. I was a rookie in the fire service, not too long out of recruit school. Got there, I didn't know what to expect because, like I said, I'm a rookie. We go over to the Pentagon and talking to the more senior firefighters, I realized that none of us really knew what was going on and what to expect. It was a day that changed our lives forever and the way we look at how we serve in the fire service itself. We lost a lot of brothers and sisters that day and we're forever grateful for their service.
Good morning. My name is Brian Hricik. I'm the Deputy Chief responsible for EMS with the Alexandria Fire Department. Memorials are an important part of our healing process. It's a way for us to remember those that we've lost. For the families that lost their wives, husbands, fathers, mothers, sons and daughters, we are all hurting for them. The public safety community took a tremendous hit that day. Firefighters, paramedics, police officers, corrections officers, doctors, and nurses all ran to those sites. Regardless of their level of training, they were all EMTs that day, armed with the tools and training for one goal, for the sake of helping others in need. Many of them did not go home that day. Today, we remember them all as heroes. We will never forget.